Rabbi, our first question we're going to hit. Don't the rabbis? Okay, so there's a statement out there, or people saying out there, that maybe Matthew or even the Gospels, maybe they're speaking more in homiletic terms. Maybe it's not supposed to be taking so literal. I mean, don't the rabbis do the same thing in the oral tradition and the Talmud and all of their rabbinic sources? That's what we're going to cover now. So, and if you want to elaborate a little bit more on what I just said before you go, please do, because I know you've heard lots of claims likewise.
All right, so let me explain the question, and this comes up frequently. It's a well-worn question. As you know, the Christian Bible, and Matthew in particular, Matthew does something that the other Gospels really don't do, and that is Matthew engages in what's called fulfillment citations, which means that the book of Matthew, unlike Luke or unlike Mark or John, will say, this is not an arbitrary event that, let's say, Jesus was born of a virgin. That means both Luke and Matthew are the only two books in the 27 canonical texts of the Christian Bible, but only Matthew and Luke make the claim that Jesus was born of a virgin. Now, whereas Luke just says in a very elaborate infancy narrative that goes, it's huge. Luke's infancy narrative, in fact, is so enormous that it's larger than some books in the Christian Bible. But Matthew takes one step further. I'm just using this as an example. Matthew tells Joseph that Mary, his betrothed, is going to bear a son, and you shall call his name Jesus, for he will save his people from their sins. This is Matthew chapter 1, verse 21, verse 20, 21, 22. And this, what Matthew says, this is not just an accident that the Messiah is supposed to be born of a virgin. It says this is to fulfill what was spoken by the prophet. And it says there, it quotes Isaiah, or we are told that he is quoting Isaiah, where it says, behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and they shall call his name Emmanuel, which means God is with us, okay? Now, people who have even a perfunctory knowledge of the Hebrew language know that this prophecy doesn't exist. But in fact, if you go back to Isaiah 7:14, and I'm using this because it's the most famous. You could do this with Micah 5, correlating to Matthew 2, but I'm just taking the one that everyone's familiar with. Okay, we'll just take that. So anybody who has even a superficial knowledge of the Hebrew language, and incidentally, it doesn't have to have, if you could speak modern Hebrew, any Israeli in the world knows this. So if you go, say, all right, this is a very serious claim that the Jewish Bible foretells that Mashiach was supposed to be born of a virgin. Okay. Now, if you go back to Isaiah and you open it up, it doesn't say that. It doesn't. The word Mashiach is not even mentioned in this chapter, and it says there, "Hine ho'alma horo v'yiledes bein v'kara shema Emmanuel," which means, "Behold, the young woman is with the child." Hora is in the present or perfect tense, and it says the young woman. It doesn't say a virgin. Everybody knows, anybody who has even a superficial knowledge of Semitic languages and who knows any Hebrew at all, whether it's biblical Hebrew or modern Hebrew, and incidentally, any Israeli can open up a Tanach, and because Hebrew is a language that's been stabilized, so therefore any Hebrew speaker could read a Tanakh and understand it, and they will say to you, anybody knows this, both in biblical Hebrew and in modern Hebrew, that it doesn't say there there's only one word in Hebrew that conveys virginity, meaning sexual history, and that is the word betula. Okay. There is no other word like it. There is no other word that conveys this. And it's a very popular word in the Jewish Bible. It appears over 100 times, all over the place. So the word that's used there is not betula. And incidentally, Isaiah had no problem using the word Betuah because he uses it all over the place in the book of Isaiah. But he says, behold, the young woman is with a child. And he's talking about Isaiah's own child, as we'll see soon. And she will bear a son. And she, vikaros, is the feminine, and she will call his name Emmanuel. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but the text says, behold, the young woman is with the child. Incidentally, there's nothing unusual about that part, because as it turns out, it's not, you don't have to be a brain surgeon to figure out that it is young women that have babies as opposed to old women. And the sign is not the birth. This is what everyone gets wrong. The sign is in 15 and 16, where, first of all, what sign? Like, what's going on? And most Christians, these are very good people, but if you ask them, like, what is the context? If you're looking at Isaiah 7:14, you obviously, it can be said axiomatically, without question, that the prophet intended that you have already read Isaiah 1 through 13. Of course he did. He presumes you've read the context. The context has nothing to do with the birth of the Mashiach. The context is that 2,700 years ago, there was a war of an alliance between the northern kingdom of Israel, when the Jewish people were divided into two kingdoms, north and south, and the northern kingdom allied itself with Syria. Okay, it's critical. Syria, not Assyria. And they aligned themselves because they didn't want the southern kingdom of Israel, which is the Davidic kingdom, to ally itself with Assyria. Okay, that's the context. Please read it for yourself. So it has nothing to do with the Mashiach. It's not talking about something that happened 700 years later, as Matthew would have believe. Please, if you're a Christian, you have any doubt, please just start reading from Isaiah 7, verse 1, and just go to verse 14. And you'll see the sign in 15:16 is that before the child knows to reject bad and choose good, these two enemies who surround you, namely Ephraim, the northern kingdom, and Ritzin, and Syria, they'll be destroyed. Okay, that's all. The baby will still be a baby, and it won't even mature, and it'll already be eating cream and honey. So, now you get the background. So what happens is there are many Christians that actually concede it and go, you know what? That in fact, a plain natural reading, no matter how you twist it, it's very clear this is not talking about a virgin. This is talking about a young woman. And the context is a siege. Yerushalayim, Jerusalem, was under siege by two great kingdoms. This is well known in history. This is the Ephraim-Syria war. It was a civil war where the northern kingdom took a non-Jewish nation and they went up against the southern kingdom. We all know about this. This is written about all over in history. So here's the story, so you understand. So what some Christian apologists go is like this. Okay. So many will say, no, they give all kinds of like this. There's like, they go into this torturous, circus act of trying to say it's good. Let's ignore that, because the more sensible Christians realize that's untenable. So what they do is they respond the following way. We grant you that the word alma doesn't indicate virginity. Now, understand, you'll say, well, young woman is like a virgin. Maybe there's some... No, virginity conveys sexual history, or the lack thereof. Young woman conveys age and gender. They have nothing to do with each other. A young woman can be a virgin, or she might not be a virgin, but virginity has nothing to do with the fact that a girl is 18 or 16 years old. She could be a mother of 3 children. They're not related. Okay, so to be clear, so some Christians do say, okay, we can see the fact that the plain natural reading of the text It's not talking about, it doesn't seem to be talking about a virgin. Matthew changed a whole bunch more that I'm not going to explain here. I explored in my book, Let's Get Biblical. I'm not trying to sell books, but there's much more detail to this. We can see that the context of Isaiah 7 is clearly not talking about the Messiah being born 700 years later, but it's talking about a contemporaneous event that is occurring then. But they say, hold on a moment. Now listen carefully. They say, isn't it true that the rabbis engaged in all kinds of Midrashic homilies where they read into texts all kinds of secondary meanings that are part of a oral tradition of the Jewish people, which does not necessarily follow the natural reading of the plain text? So there is a secondary meaning and another meaning that is a kind of called Midrashic reading, where they're using a kind of, or a typology. A typology means that we see something happening 2,700 years ago, but this is really just a type of something in the future. Okay, got it? And so on. So that's their argument. They're saying, yeah, it's true, it doesn't say it. The plain reading, the Jews are right, but Matthew is engaging in what rabbis do. Now, the truth is, this sounds like, at first glance, a good argument, but what you need to do is you need to dig and then dig a little deeper, and you find out that this is a completely fatuous claim. To begin with, all the evangelical Christians, they're Protestants. They don't like this, by the way. If you say to a Messianic, you're a Protestant, they won't like it. But they actually do accept the Protestant, the teachings of the Protestant Reformation. And importantly, germane to this show is that they accept the solas, which means the onlys, most importantly, sola scriptura. Now, Jews for Jesus, I don't care what they tell you, they're a Baptist mission to the Jews, okay? They're not, these are not like some, so these Christians who are missionizing Jews all accept are part of the Protestant movement. They reject the authority of the Roman Catholic Church right down the line. They could be charismatic Christians as well, but then there's no theological difference between a charismatic Messianic congregation and an Assemblies of God church right down the block, except the Messianic movement uses or abuses or misappropriates Jewish symbols and icons and so on. But that doesn't mean anything. The church doesn't care if you celebrate Hanukkah. It doesn't bother them. Hanukkah's in John chapter 10. The key is that the Protestant church, the key and the central part of all the groups that try to evangelize Jews, whether they identify themselves as Jews for Jesus, whose founder was a Baptist Christian minister, or they identify themselves as a charismatic Christians, they all insist that they don't believe in any oral tradition. They all demand that it's sola scriptura, which means the Bible alone, and that no other meaning that is not clearly expressed in Scripture can be used for confession or doctrine of what they believe. So therefore, they're playing a game. It's a shell game. Now, I'll tell you this, I want to just make sure that when you speak to I speak to those who are not Christians, when you speak to a Christian, they're good people, okay? Not everyone. We all have our crazies. But most Christians find this to be a very convincing argument, but they haven't thought it through because they're looking for something to support it. They can't believe that Matthew is a lie. But this is nonsense because, number one, the Protestant churches or the Messianic movement all say there is no oral law, there is no oral tradition, and the only foundation for what we believe in is only what is said in the text expressly, and that's why, for example, the Messianics, and I don't want to just attack them, all the Protestant Southern Baptist Convention, they reject the belief that Mary was born of an immaculate conception. They reject it. They reject the notion that Peter was the first pope, that he had that primacy of being the first pope based on Matthew 16. Why? They'll say to you, because it doesn't say it. Or the Protestants will say to you, unlike the Catholics who claim that, I'm just giving you an example, the Catholic Church claims that that Mary not only was a virgin when she conceived and gave birth to Jesus, but her virginity was perpetual, and that means she remained a virgin all her life. Protestants say, show it to me. So what they're doing is they're playing a game. Now that they're standing not on thin ice, they're drowning under the water of the plain text of the meaning, they're then suddenly all becoming Lubavitchers, and they're going to some Midrash. You can't use this kind of claim Midrashic thing. You reject all that. Moreover, if you want to claim that you have some Midrashic reading, that means we as Christians, and don't write to me that you're a Messianic and not a Christian. Forget that. We're going to use conventional language. If you want to claim to me that you are a Christian, then you have to reject all of this. And number two is, this is the other one, it's such a clear fallacy because it is unfalsifiable, meaning, if we're going to say that the Christians that Matthew used the Midrashic reading, if you're going to say that, then what claim can be falsified? Then why aren't you a Catholic? So maybe the Catholic Church will also say, we believe that Mary was born without the stain of original sin when she was born to Anna. Why don't you accept that? Because you say sola scriptura. That means, why don't you then believe in Hare Krishna? Why don't you then believe in Mormon? The Mormons have big claims, the fast-growing Christian sect. The reason you reject Mormonism, you ask any Christian, I'm saying to you, my sweet brothers and sisters who are Christians, I say to you, sweethearts, listen to me. You know that if I ask you, as an evangelical, why do you reject the claims of the Church of the Latter-day Saints? You know what your answer is. Your answer is because the teachings of the Mormon Church is incompatible with the teachings of the New Testament. Now, I want to ask you a question. Would you accept from a Mormon the claim that, oh yeah, it's true, it doesn't really say that Jesus is going to make a second coming in Jackson, Missouri, and he's not going to appear to Joseph Smith, but Joseph Smith was using a Midrashic thing. You would reject that as completely ridiculous, fatuous, and absurd. So please do understand that you can't just go claiming Midrashic reading. One other point is, if you want to claim that you Christians have your oral law, which you don't, so you know that, I don't have to accept your oral tradition. That means if you want to have an oral tradition, look, I'm not here to tell you Christians what to do, what to believe. Please don't be offended, but I want to be straight with you. I know you who are Christians don't want to be played, you don't want me to play games with you. If you're going to say the plain meaning does not support what Matthew says, you're saying we Christians have our own oral traditions. So fine, I'm not here to tell Christians if they can have an oral tradition or not. That's none of my business. But I'm not obligated to accept your oral traditions. You understand that? And I don't have to accept your oral tradition. You show it to me in the Bible. And finally, this is important because people get confused. The claim of the church, the claim of missionaries is not that way. If you open up any Jews for Jesus tract, and you know, those who are Christians, you know that I am saying to you the truth. You know that your claim is not that we believe in Jesus because of a Midrashic reading of Isaiah. You know that. The claim always was, that the veracity, the truth of of Christianity and that Jesus the Messiah can be demonstrated from the Jewish scriptures. And then when we go look it up, what we're looking at is a theological crime scene. This doesn't say anything like what you're saying. And then what you're doing is then you change the rules and say, oh, it's a Midrashic reading. So don't claim that it says it in Isaiah. And by the way, to just understand, as far as our Muslim brothers are concerned, we're family. Muslims don't do this kind of stupidity. The Muslims do not, and I want to make this clear, Muslims believe that Jesus was born of a virgin. They do believe that. But if you ask a Muslim, and remember, Arabic and Hebrew are the same family of languages. I mean, they're sister languages. There's anybody who speaks Hebrew or is familiar with Arabic, you know how close those languages are. Many, many Muslims speak Hebrew, have studied Hebrew. Muslims laugh at Matthew as being a completely corrupt text, completely. And they say openly, any Muslim scholar of the Jewish Bible will tell you on the spot that Matthew is corrupt from beginning to end, with some few exceptions if it agrees with the Quran. But it's critical to understand that Muslims do not lower themselves in these kinds of fatuous sophomoric claims. They do not say that the reason we believe that Jesus was born of virgin because it says in Isaiah, they would laugh you out of the mosque. They would laugh you out of a madrasa. They say it's nothing to do with Matthew. It's because it says it in the Quran in Surah 19, not because of it actually says it a few times, but not because of this nonsense from Matthew. And therefore, this is a completely silly claim. And just think about it. If we can just say there's some Midrashic reading, then how could you reject the Roman Catholic Church? How could you reject the Mormon Church? Then everything is possible. Nothing is falsifiable. And therefore, it is completely illogical, irrational, and it is not an honest hermeneutic.
אדון עולם אשר מלך בטרם כל יציר נברא